I think the future of work is hybrid work. It's flexible work. Again, I and many other people have talked about this for years and years and years. I mean, you look around at the gas prices now. I was driving around here where I live in Los Angeles. Gas prices are around $7 a gallon. I mean, it's completely insane, the amount of money that people are spending just to drive to work and back from work. You know, I think of the first job that I had at graduating college, actually in Los Angeles in downtown LA, and I was spending an hour and a half driving to work and an hour and a half back from work each day. So 3 hours a day, 15 hours a week just spent driving. That's 15 hours of productivity. Combine that with who knows how much I was spending on gas, and it's triple, quadruple the cost of that now. So yeah, I think the future of work is flexible and a hybrid work, but it doesn't mean virtual work. I think there is a blend to be found between working in an office and seeing employees face to face, your peers, your coworkers, your leaders, and also doing work in a virtual world. Do you want to hear something really crazy? 96% of the people who watch videos on this channel are not subscribed. Help me change that number around by subscribing so that you can get access to more videos just like this one. And now let's get back to the content. So as far as how we keep that culture going, well, the way that you do that is you blend things together. So when employees need to be face-to-face, when we need to create that trust, that psychological safety, when we need collaboration or innovation, when we need to brainstorm ideas, talk about important topics, when we need to come together as a team to create that feeling of belonging and purpose, like we're a part of a team, sure, you can do a lot of that stuff in person. But if you're working day to day on your projects, your tasks, you're making phone calls, you're emailing people, whatever it is that you're doing, a lot of those things can be done in a virtual world. So this is why I think the ideal scenario is a blend between the in-person and between the virtual environment. One of the big challenges for a lot of leaders is not just even leading in a remote world, but it's just thinking about how leadership is changing. That was actually one of the big themes, actually the theme that I explored in my most recent book, The Future Leader. And for that, I interviewed 140 CEOs around the world. And one of the things that I was trying to figure out is, how is leadership changing? And from doing these interviews, I identified a very specific set of 4 mindsets and 5 skill sets that all current and aspiring leaders need to practice. And these include things like having the global citizen mindset, which means you can think big picture and surround yourself by people who are not like you. It means you have the mindset of the explorer, which is about curiosity, having a growth mindset, being agile and nimble. It also included skills like the technology teenager, where you embrace technology, you don't run from it. The skill of the futurist, where you think in terms of scenarios and possibilities instead of just picking one path and going down it. The skill of the coach, where you believe that your role as a leader is to help make other people more successful than you. Part of the challenge that a lot of leaders are faced with now is really understanding that their role has changed. Who they are, their purpose as leaders has changed. You know, for many, many years, you were able to get into a leadership role, not having to be able to practice any of these mindsets or skill sets. If you stayed at the company for a long time, if you brought in a lot of money, if you were good at office politics and bureaucracy, if you knew somebody in a higher position, chances are you eventually made it into that leadership role. And the big thing that I'm hearing from a lot of the CEOs that I'm interviewing now is that that's not going to work anymore, because there is this collective consciousness shift for organizations, for leaders, for employees, where they recognize you now need to earn that leadership position. You're not just gonna get it because of these like loopholes that you were able to get around. So leaders are really, I think, going through an interesting transformation where they actually have to become leaders. And part of that means understanding and learning how to lead in a virtual world, which means you're not micromanaging. You know, you can't micromanage in a virtual world. You're gonna drive people nuts. It also means that you need to be able to practice empathy, even in a virtual world. When you get on a conference call, when you get on a call with your team, you don't just jump into it and say, hey, how are those sales figures going? How are you? How's your family? Are you okay, right? Being able to bring that humanity, even if it's in a virtual environment. All those things are very, very important for leaders. There's also a lot of trust that goes into it because you don't see people working. You're not in an office. So there is a level of trust on behalf of the leaders. There's a level of trust on behalf of the employees. And there's also, I think, an increased level of accountability, where if you're in an office, it's very easy because you can have a leader that checks in on you all the time. Hey, what are you working on? How are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. If you're in a virtual world and you don't have somebody constantly near you, you need to be very much accountable yourself to make sure that you are motivating yourself, pushing yourself, getting things done, producing good quality work, because you might not have somebody who's constantly checking in on you. So there's a lot that goes into it, but by and large, I think leaders need to accept that we live in a hybrid world. We work in a hybrid world. And that means we need to shift how we think about leadership as well. Some people will come into an office and other people won't. It depends on the work that you're doing. If you're working in a manufacturing facility, if you're working in retail, if you're working in a particular role where you need to be seeing your customers, chances are, yeah, you're not going to be working in a virtual world. You are going to be working in person. But if you're doing things that don't require that, then sure, you may have that luxury and ability to work in a virtual world. So it really depends on the function that you have. But we need to remember that it's not about working in a virtual environment just for the sake of being in a virtual environment. If the role that you are performing, if your job is not conducive to working in a virtual world, then you're not going to be working in a virtual world, right? I mean, that's how it works. So I think there is this misconception that it's just about, let's work virtually because we can. No, I mean, you're still ultimately a part of a business. You still are ultimately a part of a team, a part of an organization, and you still have your roles that you need to fulfill. You still have a job that you need to get done. And if you're leaders, and if there's data and evidence and something that supports where you are not as effective in a virtual world, then of course the organization is going to ask for you to perform the things that you are doing in person and coming to the office. Now, however, I do think there is still room for flexibility there, because a leader might say, hey, look, I understand that you have some peers and you know that there are some employees at this company who are working virtually, and you might think that it is a little bit unfair that you need to come into the office. Here's what we can do. Why don't we figure out the things that you need to perform that are requiring you to come in, and which things that you can perform in a virtual world? In other words, if you are meeting with customers, if you are going to be a part of any kind of sales meetings, things like that, I would like for you to come in, okay? But if you have a day or several days during the week where you're not performing those functions and you're doing other things, it's totally fine for you to work from home. That's where the flexibility comes into play. And I think a big part of what's required is having that dialogue between leaders and between teams. I think it is a little ignorant just to say, oh, you got to come into the office full time. Well, what if I don't have any meetings that day? What if the stuff that I'm doing that particular day is just answering a bunch of emails or working on a presentation? So there does need to be that dialogue, that flexibility, that open two-way conversation between leaders and employees to see what makes sense and what doesn't. This is, again, going back to the theme of flexibility and hybrid work. I'm not a fan of any kind of blanket statements, of any kind of general rules. Everybody has to do this, everybody has to do that. I think it really does need to be more of that conversation.